Hey everyone, it's Peter Kerr from Daydream Nation, and today we are going to do an episode on rock artists that should have been bigger. So I have the panel, John Clauser from My Music Corner. Hello, John. How you going, mate?
Doing good, mate. How you doing, my brother?
Fantastic. John the Music Nut, welcome back, my friend. How are you going?
I'm going great, Peter. How about you?
Not too bad at all. So I'll throw it over to you, John Clauser. What is your first artist that you are going to pick that you thought should have been bigger?
Okay, so my picks tonight kind of goes with my little nickname here, Johnny Metal, because I just was in a metal mood when I was thinking of bands that I have listened to so much over the years that I'm like, man, these guys all should have been so much bigger than they were. There's a couple choices here that I'm sure some of your viewers will probably be like, well, yeah, we all knew that. I mean, as consistent as they have been throughout the years. And then there's one band that, yeah, after two albums and then a name change, they just kind of rode off into the sunset. So I'm actually going to start with that first band. So these guys were legends in the Western Maryland, West Virginia, Washington, D.C. area in the mid to late 80s. These guys played just about every dump hole you could find. If they paid you, they played. And these guys just honed in their craft. These guys mixed some thrash, a little bit of jazz fusion, a little bit of blues, a little bit of progressive rock, a little bit of everything. Y'all probably figured it out. I'm talking about Wrathchild America. And it's a shame that they had to put the America on their name because as far as I'm concerned, they are Wrathchild. Only has two albums. You have Climbing the Walls here and 3D. Climbing the Walls, great album. Just a lot of good thrashy tunes. Hell's Gates, great song. No Deposit, No Returns, kind of a fun little song. Hernia is a great instrumental. London After Midnight, you talk about some vampires. Katie from a Madman, Silent. I mean, just a cover of Pink Floyd's Time. Wonderful album. 3D. You got the motto. I feel like I live too much every day, surrounded by idiots. Drain Time, Gentleman Death. Another Nameless Face has a little bit of a reggae feel. Prego kind of has some jazz fusion in it. There's just these guys were just such a talented group of guys. Shannon would go on to play. Shannon Larkin would go on to play in Godsmack. Brad would eventually go on to be like a front of house guy, for engineering and stuff like that. But man, these guys had such a good sound. I think timing and the fact that they got mired in a lawsuit because of the whole Wrathchild name, because a British band called them Wrathchild said, no, we were Wrathchild before you guys. Well, Wrathchild America it was, but Wrathchild America, great band, should have been a lot bigger, but just didn't work out.
That's a nice pick, John. I'm actually familiar with the UK version of the band called Wrathchild, so I'm not as familiar with the American version, and that's something that I will investigate. But nicely. What record label were they on, incidentally?
Atlantic.
Right, major label all the way through their career.
Yeah, but like I said, the two albums were on Atlantic, but 3D came out in 91, 92.
Yep.
You kind of can figure that out. So
yeah, absolutely. That wasn't a great time for heavy metal, hard rock. Indeed. All right. Thank you very much, John. John the Music Nut, what's your first pick?
Well, as the self-proclaimed music nut, I'm going a little different. So my first one, he was a very restless musician. We lost him in 2005. Anytime I get a chance to talk about this artist, I take the opportunity to do so. And this is Chris Whitley. This was his first album, Living with the Law. Chris Whitley was getting a push from Columbia Records in 1991. He made some appearances on Late Night with David Letterman. He opened for Tom Petty and the Heartbreakers on the Into the Great Wide Open tour. He received some radio play on AOR with the songs Big Sky Country and the title track to Living with the Law, which is this album here. This was his debut, 1991. This album is just full of riches. I have loved this ever since I bought the cassette the year it came out. And he didn't really cross over. And one thing I think that might have hurt him was he waited a little too long to do the follow-up album, which was Den of Ecstasy in 1995. And on this album, instead of going into that kind of roots rock meets blues meets Americana sound, like he did on Living with the Law, he went into this heavy psychedelic Hendrix thing. And I think what happened was the people who were into his music, they were turned off because he did a complete about face, and then the album just tanked. The thing about Chris Whitley, or the reason I think he should have been bigger, is because even though he was so restless musically, his albums were almost always great. This is a 10. Well, this is a 10. You can still find used copies of this pretty easy. And this is a 10 album. This whole album is great. Den of Ecstasy, I like even more, even though it's heavier and completely different. He's one of the greatest guitar players you'll ever hear. He was a master of the dobro and the pedal steel. And as time went on, he started changing his sound. He went on the indie route after his third album, Terra Incognita, didn't do so well. And he made a great album called Dirt Floor, a very sparse 28-minute acoustic blues album that's excellent. And this is a fantastic live album. This is live at Martyrs. It's just him, the guitar, and the foot stomp. And it is amazing. Very distinctive singer. He's got a lot of pain in his voice. He's one of these guys he sings, he puts chills through your spine. As time went on, he continued to challenge himself. This is Hotel Vasta Rise, and this album he made with Martin and Wood from the great jazz trio Modesty, Martin and Wood. This is a wonderful album. And then a few years later, and he was putting out albums at a pretty reckless pace at this point. He had lung cancer, and this was the last album he made when he had lung cancer, just a Soft Dangerous Shores, and he passed on right after this. And you heard his voice getting weaker and weaker on this album. And this album's like really avant-garde. Like, he changed his sound. He had some hip-hop stuff on the Rocket House album, and that, I believe, might have been on Dave Matthews' record label. But a restless artist who left us too soon, and he has a small cult following, but his songs just stand up. I don't understand why he never got played on the radio back then. I mean, very little in 1991, and he's not getting played today. It's just a small, very passionate cult following, a fantastic musician, songwriter, Chris Whitley. Love him. As long as I have air in my lungs, I will talk about him.
Very eloquently said, John.
Thank you.
And anything this small little channel can do to keep the fire burning about some of these artists that in the past that need to be recognized, I'm glad to help it along. So well
Absolutely.
done.
Thank you.
Interesting thing you said is that sometimes it takes a little shift where an artist is broadening their musical palette and the audience doesn't move with them. And that's a little bit disappointing. It can just be a slight change on the dial that they're changing their sound, and the audience that loves that particular sound and they're used to it, they just won't move. And it sounds like this particular artist is a bit of a shapeshifter. He's experimenting, he's musically curious, but unfortunately, a lot of the audience and maybe the record label support didn't move with him.
That's correct. After his third album, Terra Incognita, Columbia Records dropped him, and then he did Dirt Floor on, I believe, Messenger Records, and he actually sold more records on an indie label than he did on Columbia with his last album. He was a lot of musicians talk very passionately about Chris Whitley and how his music has really inspired them, and they were influenced how he was an influence on them. So, but
Yeah.
you know, the musicians really know who the talent is. You know.
Absolutely. Thank you for that.
Thank you.
All right. Well, my first pick is an Australian band, and it's a bit of a head scratch that this band was not bigger. They had a very charismatic lead singer. They had a sound that was very pop friendly, but with a lot of rock. They had songs that had hooks aplenty. And I'm talking about a band called Boom Crash Opera. Now, Boom Crash Opera, Melbourne band, came out in 1987. How would I describe their sound? Well, the singer had that Michael Hutchins charisma, very sort of charismatic, great voice. The songs were I would describe them as an amped up version of Tears for Fears meets U2. Bombastic in a good way, lots of anthems, hooks. They were a bit of a hit in Australia. This album, the self-titled debut, had a song called Great Wall that went to number 5 in the charts. Now, the follow-up album, which you in America may be familiar, was These Here Are Crazy Times, and they had a song called Onion Skin, and that hit number 8 in the rock charts. You know how they have all these different sort of genre charts in the Billboard? They were signed to Giant Records, which was an affiliate of Warner's. There was a bit of a radio push, and they were about to tour America. But guess what happened? Giant Records went belly up, and therefore they didn't tour America. But Onion Skin off this album, These Here Are Crazy Times, was one of the most added songs to rock radio for a period of time in 1989. But alas, they didn't have the funding because of Giant Records going down to tour America. So they were a bit more of a local phenomenon. I mean, this album went to number 11. This album went to number 19. It's just a real head scratch, because if they had that tour, they had the sound that, you know, very much in the INXS sort of genre, in that sort of wheelhouse, big bombastic songs, very percussive, a lot of the bottom end and the bass and the drums. A lot of the songs would have that call and response. I really implore the viewers to check them out on YouTube. Really catchy songs. Great Wall, Hands Up in the Air, These Here Are Crazy Times, The Best Thing. I even have a funny feeling that some of their songs have made it into some American soundtracks. I was doing some research I can't find, but I'm sure I've heard some of their songs in promos for some American movies around that time in 87, 89. But, you know, you had fantastic songwriters in the band, but alas, it all came down to the record label, and the record label not having that financial backing and push to get them to do that tour of America. They just needed that one break, and alas, they would have been bigger. So that's a real head scratch where all the components are there. So per Boom Crash Opera, it comprises Dale Ryder, who's the lead vocalist, Greg O'Connor on keyboards, Peter Maslin on drums, Richard Pleasance on guitar, bass, and Peter Farnan on guitar as well. So look, a very melodic, bombastic type of pop rock band. Should have been much bigger. It's a total head scratch. That's my candidate, Boom Crash Opera. Check this out. These Here Are Crazy Times, and their self-titled debut.
Nice.
Alrighty.
I'll have to check that one out. That sounds good.
John Clauser, what's your next pick?
Man, you guys kind of went in the realm of some pretty tough to find type of stuff. So on my next choice is going to be a band that I know a lot of people have heard of. As far as I'm concerned, if you were going to make the next big four of thrash metal bands, this band, which in my opinion, would be one of them. And I'm talking about this little band out of Arizona. They had a bass player that was offered this once in a lifetime kind of gig, because unfortunately this band, they lost their bass player in a tragic accident, and it's just like after that first album, these guys have just been, they would put in consistent stuff out. It's just labels or whatever just wasn't quite getting them. I'm talking about Flotsam and Jetsam. I mean, man, oh gosh, I first heard these guys on Best of Metal Blade Volume 2. And that my introduction to Jason Newsted, and he is all over this album, lyrically, bass, everything. And he's just, and guitars just amazing. Good, the drums amazing. Eric AK's vocals amazing. Keep going down the line. No place for disgrace. When the storm comes down, Quattro, Drift. I mean, High, Unnatural Selection. My God, Dreams of Death. I can't remember how my order is. The Cold, Ugly Noise, and then the self-titled that came, where they just came blistering back, and then of course their last two, the Rise of Chaos and Blood and Water, or Blood in the Water. Oh. Do I even need to talk about Flotsam and Jetsam? They have been just a consistent output, but for whatever reason, none of their albums charted the top 200, Billboard Top 200, which is a head scratcher to me. They were bounced around on labels. They got onto Elektra. They got booted off Elektra. Then they were on MCA for a little while. They were kind of going through all kinds of sounds. Then they got on Metal Blade. Then they got on this. Then they got on that. And then they're on a new label now. But maybe that inconsistency wasn't there for them. The drummers kind of changed a little bit. The bassists were changing a little bit. The guitar players were changing a little bit. Who knows? All I know is if you were going to make 5, 6, 7, and 8, I would probably put them along with, say, Testament and Exodus and
Overkill.
Overkill. Thank you. That would be my next 4 of the big 4. But yeah, there's not much I can say about that. There's just pounding thrash, great social awareness, great lyrics, great, Eric's voice still sounds really good. It's aged well, given all the high stuff he hits. Guitar players, Michael Gilbert, Ed Carlson, and everybody else that's coming along the way, they've all done a fantastic job. Great catalog. One that I would love to do a thing on someday, and I hope to somewhere down the line.
Yeah, nice. Well, I actually featured them on a show on Rock Daydream Nation called Epic Songs. And I was talking about
right.
Metal Shock as being one of my favorite epic heavy metal songs. So I love that band. And they were the first band that had a person that could sing in the genre of thrash, because
Yes.
a lot of the thrash that was coming out was very, that demon-like voice, very gravelly. And here you had a singer that was singing up there with Rob Halford and Bruce Dickinson, but with that turbocharged thrash speed metal sound. And it was fantastic. I think that first album, the thing that kind of killed it was it's a naff album cover. Album covers are very important. You want to put it up. Yeah, it's a little bit childish. And yeah, that's one of the things that I would say is a negative. Newsted leaving the band, that's another negative, because he was a component, the part of that chemistry, the original band.
Mm-hmm.
And I guess from jumping from record label to label is a sign that it's a band looking for direction. The label doesn't know how to market them. Are they speed? Are they metal? Are they hard rock? That's not a good sign. So I just think that this band has had a lot of bad luck, and circumstances just did not fall in the way that they wanted it to fall. But yeah, look, that's an example of a band that should have been much bigger, because artistically they're great.
Yes,
Those albums
absolutely.
are killer. And that first album is, that really had an impact in the metal scene over in Sydney and Australia.
Yes.
We were playing that a lot, and we really thought they were going to be the best new thing. I mean, a lot of musos were playing that and going, listen to this. It's a speed metal album, and the guy can sing and sing well.
Yeah. No. And he still can. He still can. It's maybe a little more rough around the edges, but boy, he still got it.
Yeah. Well done. Good pick. All right, John the Music Nut, what's your next one?
All right. Well, speaking of great bands where the man could still sing, I'll give you the visual, and then those of you listening to this and not watching, I will say who it is in a few seconds. Y&T. Hard rock does not get much better than Y&T. And in their prime, they were a juggernaut. Musically fantastic, great songs, memorable hooks, great choruses. Through the first part of the 80s, they were fantastic. And they've had some albums that weren't nearly as good, but they rebounded and made some more very good albums. But you can argue they're the best band that ever came out of San Francisco. And yes, I know Metallica came out of San Francisco, California as well. But Y&T have been around since 1974. They originally were Yesterday and Today. They put out 2 albums. They got dropped by the record label. They called themselves Y&T later because when they would play gigs, after they would end their show, the crowd would chant Y&T, Y&T. And then they changed the name to Y&T. Speaking of which, isn't this one of the best hard rock, best band logos ever? I mean, you always hear AC/DC, Kiss, blah, blah, blah. Y&T's logo is pretty badass.
I concur.
Y&T, though, yeah, thanks, man. Y&T were awesome. I don't know. I think the record label A&M didn't give them as big a push as they should have. They were right on the cusp within Rock We Trust, which was my gateway into Y&T. And that's this bad boy right here in Rock We Trust. They had some video play with Lipstick and Leather and Don't Stop Running. These first 4 albums, once they changed their name to Y&T, beginning with Earthshaker, and a lot of people think this is their best. I wouldn't argue with them because Earthshaker is a killer album. Peter, we did a show that just started today, debuted today, about songs with great riffs that you recognize within the first 20 seconds. Y&T's got a ton of them. I mean,
what happened to the logo on that?
That was one thing. There was some inconsistency here because they have a different logo on this. Then they changed their logo on Down for the Count, went back to this logo on Contagious and 10, and then the 90s when they came out with a couple albums. I think one of those albums, it might have been musically incorrect, they changed the logo again, only for them to go back to the original logo. But Dave Meniketti has been their singer and lead guitar player from the start. He still sounds amazing, and he's pushing 70. And he still looks great, too. They're still doing 2-hour shows. All live. No tapes, nothing. It's them, and they kick butt. The other 3 members in the band have passed away in the last few years from different things, but those prime albums, Earthshaker, Black Tiger, Mean Streak was their first video on MTV, and then Rock We Trust. These are killer records. And if you want to Dig Deeper, Contagious is very good. 10 is very good. I think another thing that might have hurt them, Down for the Count, they rushed it out because they put out a live album and it was only a single called Open Fire, which was killer. And they put out the Summertime Girls single. Now, that was the closest thing they had a hit they ever had. It hit number 55 on the Billboard Hot 100. When you listen to it, it doesn't really sound much like Y&T, though. It sounds more like Sammy Hagar. And they had these loud keyboards in it, a la Heart from that same era when they were doing the self-titled and then Bad Animals. And then the next album came out a few months later, and it was sprinkled with a lot of keyboards on it. And I think the record company was trying to spice them up, and it just wasn't them. And I think it hurt them commercially, because then they put out these very good to great albums later, and they just didn't cross over. They would never be the same. I mean, they'd still chart, but they lost their momentum. But I'll tell you what, you listen to these albums today, you think to yourself, how come these songs aren't on AOR now? Because they're just as strong as all the good stuff that's on AOR. You listen to these albums, and a lot of the albums that came out in the 80s by bands who were a lot more successful, these have really stood the test of time. These have aged a lot better than bands from the late 80s, especially, your hair metal bands. But there's a lot of meat on these bones. This is a fantastic band. I mean, they killer live. I mean, all their live albums are really great, because they made 2 double live albums later in their career, Yesterday and Today live, and then Live at the Mystic. But the Y&T are fantastic. And I've seen them live 3 times, and they blew me away every time. Killer live band. It should have been bigger. They didn't have a gold album. You're like, how? How did they not? Y&T, fantastic. Yeah. I love them.
Thanks for that.
You're welcome.
I might be a little bit contrarian here, so warning. I've got a theory why they didn't break bigger. I think that there is a charisma element that is maybe lacking in the band. There are certain bands that are really good in the studio and live musically, but there's not that element of charisma, rock star. There's nobody in that band to me that sort of says, I'm a rock star, and sort of propelled it to that next level. And that may be slightly kind of controversial, but it's sort of like, I don't know, wonderful. He's got a wonderful voice.
Still,
they play well-crafted hard rock songs, but to push it to the next level, I don't know. I think it's a charisma thing. And also there was some really bad marketing, like that album cover with the Y&T where they changed the logo and it's above an ocean, or what is it? That's a terrible album cover.
It's a woman right there, and then like a sky and a lightning strike. Yeah.
Almost looks like the Hollywood Hills.
Yeah. Sorry, I can't see it clearly.
I'm sorry.
They changed their sound. It became more Bon Jovi-esque. So listen to the greatest hits. That is a real sort of it opens your ears to how they sonically changed and how they became corporatized, because you can see the suits of the major labels were saying, hey, I want this to sound more like Bon Jovi. Let's throw in some keyboards, because summertime onwards, a lot of keyboards, and they were losing the crunch and the grit of their earlier songs. So, yeah, I don't know. I'm sorry, maybe it's controversial, but I just feel that there's a charisma element that's kind of missing in this band, and that's why they just didn't break into the level. There are some bands that are always in the support, but they haven't made it into that sort of the big league.
Maybe it's because Dave was a singer and a lead guitar player. You think that might have had something to do with it? Like, they think of Triumph. They had Rick Emmett, who was a great singer, who also played lead guitar. they never quite broke open either. I mean, they were big in Canada, of course, and won a bunch of Juno Awards. But here they were a little bigger than Y&T were, but they were on the cusp and they never quite went over. So maybe it's because of that. And you are right. When they went to Geffen Records and they did the Contagious record, yeah, that was, the record company was really working with them. Like, you listen to the song Contagious, there is a lot of Living on a Prayer on that in the bass line. So I understand where you're coming from. But I think A&M didn't do a great job marketing them from 81 to 85. And the Down for the Count record, which was their last one with them, I think they took them away from who they really were. Although there were some good songs on it, it just wasn't really there.
Yeah.
When you listen to the early stuff, it's magnificent.
Absolutely. There are some metal bands they've got an audience for guitar heads, heavy metal heads, but to break into that stratosphere and appeal to the people that buy a Bon Jovi album or a Whitesnake album or a Guns N' Roses album, you've got to have rock and roll charisma, bit of danger, bit of stagecraft. These guys, they're great musos and they well crafted. I've got their live album. It's fantastic. But to break from a support act into a main act, you've got to have that X factor. And I feel that may be the reason why they just didn't break into the next level. There's something like, there's some X factor that's just missing. But I love them. I really do. And, their early albums are, really well crafted. But yeah, that's just my take on it. But look, nice pick.
Thank you. And very good points there, no doubt. I can understand where you're coming from.
Yeah, thank you. All right. Staying in the genre of heavy metal, I'm going to talk about this UK band, and they formed in 1974. So they were there right in the days of hard rock. They changed their sound over time. They were formed by two brothers, Mark and John Gallagher. I'm talking about a band called Raven. Now, Raven were one of the original architects of speed metal. You could probably say they're part of the new wave of British heavy metal, but they've been ignored. And a lot of their understudies and people that went on tours with them, and I'm talking to you, Metallica, went on to multi-platinum success, whereas Raven sort of chugged along. So I'm a bit of a Raven fan. Put out the albums. You've got Rock Until You Drop. There you go. And you can see the whole image of this band is sheer lunacy. And I'll talk more about that in a moment. Wiped Out, it's probably one of their best albums. Songs like Faster Than the Speed of Light. Then you've got All for One. I saw the show and I got the lads to autograph Take Control, Mind Over Metal. But then there was a period where it all started to go wrong, where they signed to a major label,
Atlantic.
And this is, in many people's eyes, the nadir. The pack is back where it was Atlantic Records, which I will be incidentally doing In Defense of with John Clauser coming soon. They should have been bigger because their sound is not outside the wheelhouse of many acts that went on to great musical fortune. I'm looking at you, Metallica. I'm looking at you, Megadeth. I'm looking at you, Slayer, sort of. Vocally, still in the wheelhouse. Their songs were fast and furious, but the thing that probably killed them is their image is really wacky, where you've got a guy, the drummer, Rob Wacko Hunter, and they went from initially a speed metal band into what they call athletic rock. Now, what the hell's athletic rock? That's just, yeah. I think if they maintained the integrity and the image of that early Raven and kept it pure, denim, t-shirt, jeans, and less of the wackiness, then they could have rightfully been spoken about in the same breath as your Metallicas and your Megadeths. And all of those people they're still cited as the big four or big three of thrash metal, because they were damn influential. They were right there at the start. And all these bands that were supporting them in Europe and in America, they stole a lot of their licks, a lot of their riffs, a lot of their stagecraft from Raven. Now, Raven is still going today. I saw him a couple of years ago. Thank you, John. They're still
and this is an amazing album. They're a brand new one. Very, very good. Very solid.
They've still got it. But I think the thing that killed them is that they changed their image into this athletic rock. They signed to Atlantic Records. They made their sound more pop. I'll defend the album, The Pack is Back, because I still think it's a fine rock album, but it loses what made them so special at the start, because they had a sound that was quite unique. Speed metal. They were on a par with Motorhead. They were kind of in those waters. But over time, they got seduced by a record company. Because let's face it, in the 80s, big corporate labels were throwing money at anything that was remotely heavy and hard, because that was a license to print money. But at the same time, they polished the sound of Raven, and you basically lost what made Raven so special in the start. That starchy, that spiky, that wonderful riffy sound. So that's my test case of a band that should have been much bigger, and it's a head scratch, because when you think of everything that's in heavy metal, whether it's speed or thrash, there's a linkage to Raven, and they don't get talked about. So there you go, Raven.
I definitely agree with that. That would have been a pick of mine too. I really would have wanted to go there with them. I think for me, the other thing that didn't help Raven too much is after they were dropped by Atlantic, they got picked up by Combat, and then Combat, I think, fell apart, and they went through the 90s on some small labels. I was trying to, how many folks have this album by Raven? Okay, I don't know if you can see that.
Glow.
It's called Glow.
Is that that's a Jesus Christ pose? Is it? What is it? Is the Brazil? What is?
No, it's some, I don't know. It kind of looks like Mark in like a monk's thing, but he's kind of like in a like he's sleepwalking, but it's like he's summoning these beings around a sun looking thing or something. I don't know what it is, but no, it's not the Brazil.
I need to get
Jesus
my glass. Oh, sorry.
Oh, but yeah. Anyway, but that's a tough album. Some of those 90s albums are tough to come by. They were just on small labels that just you couldn't get. If you're going to find those, you're going to be paying some bucks for them, whether it's on CD or unless you were able to get them firsthand. And then, unfortunately, Mark suffered an injury that took him out of the game for quite a while. And Raven wasn't able to perform or do shows for quite a while. And they've come back, and my gosh, Extermination, Metal City, and then All Hell's Breaking Loose. Goodness, those are brutal, pummeling albums. It's just like, if you thought those first three albums were amazing and classic, well, this takes it to a different level. And this is like 35, 40 years later from those albums.
Yep.
And that's just wonderful. And they're awesome guys. Awesome guys to hang out with. So
yeah. Well, I saw them live, and they were supporting Girls' School with Tank. What a lineup!
Oh wow,
that was just wonderful.
Yeah.
And I've always wanted to see Raven. I've always loved this band, and just to see them live, they were fantastic. They had a different drummer. I think it was Mark Heller, who so
that's the current drummer. Yeah.
Yeah. Rob Wacko Hunter, the guy with the crash helmet, is actually in record production. So he's gone behind the scenes. He's like a record engineer. But they were fantastic. They're so entertaining. And just a head scratch, because they were right there at the start. They had great songs, but a lot of the young kids picked up the licks and ran with it, and the record companies picked them up and put them in the right direction. But, going from an independent record label, Neat Records, signing to Atlantic, you go, oh, yes, we'll just follow exactly what you want us to do. And that was a disaster, because they wanted them to do, covers of Give Me Some Loving and put a horn section and polish it up. And it's just ridiculous. It's completely changing the sound of what made them so special. But I will defend the album, but as a rock album, and under a different name. Anyway.
At least with their EP Mad that came out after Pack Is Back, that was a bit of a return to form.
A partial. I don't think it was
partial,
fully,
not completely, but they were getting there. They were certainly getting there. But by the time they got onto Combat, then they started kind of going a little different directions, but they eventually found their way, and man, it's just been solid ever since.
They were on critical support if they were seriously in the operating room in a hospital in the 90s.
Yeah. Oh,
All right. Well, there you go. Raven.
All right. Well, so my last and final pick is going to be another band that I'm sure a lot of folks out there is going to be very familiar with. Mike Portnoy said if it was not for this band, Dream Theater would not have become what they were back then. And I'm talking about a little band out of Connecticut called Fate's Warning. Mm-hmm. And gotta love that first album cover. Maybe again, they're on Metal Blade, like Flotsam and Jetsam started off on Metal Blade. But these guys started more of as maybe an Iron Maiden kind of sound, but with maybe a little more prog elements, which would start building more with each album. You have the debut here. Spectre Within was a huge leap over the first album. To me, this is my favorite album of the John Arch era, Waken the Guardian. I just absolutely love the track Guardian. It's just a beautiful song. Prelude to Ruin was my introduction, again, on Best of Metal Blade Volume 2. But John Arch just had this unique voice, and Jim Matthews, just a great guitar player and singer and songwriter. John Arch would leave the band to kind of couldn't support doing the band thing because nothing was breaking the top 200. I think this eventually hit 191 on the top 200 Billboard charts. They get a new singer, Ray Alder. You get No Exit with their first big epic of the Ivory Gate of Dreams. But, Anarchy Divine, Silent Cries, great tracks. This was probably their highest charting album, Perfect Symmetry, great album there. Parallels with these. This has so many good songs on it. I was listening to it again earlier. I was like, Leave the Past Behind, Eye to Eye, Point of View, The Road Goes On Forever. Just love that album. Inside Out, another good album. And then they would really go full on prog metal with the Pleasant Shade of Gray, with the 10, I think it's like 10 parts of all one continuous thing. They still kept putting stuff out, Disconnected, FWX, Darkness in a Different Light, Theories of Flight, and their most recent Long Day, Good Night. Here again, maybe it's just that style of music that these guys do, and maybe they just aren't maybe it's just a little too inaccessible to reach the masses. But I agree. If these guys, if there was no Fates Warning, you probably wouldn't have gotten Dream Theater as you heard them. I think Dream Theater would have sounded completely different, in my opinion. And I think Portnoy would say the same thing. There's been a lot of different offshoot bands that's come and gone from these guys. Mark Zonder, who was the drummer for a while, and Ray Alder did a project called A to Z, which is an amazing, amazing album. I highly check it out. Jim Matthews did a thing called Kings of Mercy, and he's done some solo stuff. Joey Vera with Armored Saints been playing bass with him for a while. Just a fantastic band, just musically, just maybe they're just a little too intelligent for a lot of the normal listeners or something. But to me, these guys should have been a lot bigger. And that's my last choice. Fates Warning.
Well said, John. Extensive catalog and definitely a bit of a head scratch. Look, some of the reasons why bands are not bigger than they should be, it's a total head scratch. And you can't really define it to a reason. So, yeah, well done.
Oh, yeah.
John the Music Nut, it's your last pick.
Well, how did I get so crazy? Because of rock and roll. That's Raven. But I'm not going to talk about Raven.
I thought you were talking to me for a moment. I thought.
No, it was off of the Mad EP.
Right. Okay.
Yeah, there you go. I
Well
remember
played.
it very well. Thank you. Yeah.
Here I am, like a stunned mullet, and going, what's he trying to say here?
Yeah, Pat. Yeah, John and I had said off air while we were doing a show on his channel, My Music Corner. Pack is Back to Raven was like Down for the Count was to Y&T, but worse. Yeah,
I'm
that was just.
I'm going to defend it.
I'm not saying
coming soon.
I had the cassette. I don't have it anymore, but I enjoyed some songs on there.
Well, maybe after you watch the show, I might convert you. You might be born again. Pack is Back.
I might be. Maybe I'll pick up the CD again. Or perhaps
you'll pick it up and then it'll just go like that. I actually have a CD of the Pack is Back. I found that in the wild. That's very hard to find. John, you probably know more than me, but I think vinyl is easier to find secondhand of the Pack is Back than the CD. But I have, very rare.
Yeah, I would agree with that.
My last choice is one that had some airplay here in the States. They never quite broke through, but I can listen to this band's old stuff all the time, even to this day, and it's The Alarm. The Alarm have been called like a poor man's U2. No. The Alarm were a great band. I'm not saying they were better than U2. They weren't as eclectic as U2. I don't know if they ever made that classic album that U2 had done a few times. But their early stuff, their anthems are fantastic. Songs like 68 Guns and Where Were You Hiding When the Storm Broke and The Stand, Absolute Reality. The songs from Declaration and Strength, the title track, The Strength, got a lot of video play here. And I have a few of their albums, but when I really want to get my Alarm fix, I go to this best of called Standards. Because this has all those great singles that did well in Europe. And then it has the very good songs when they went more AOR in the mid-'80s, like Rain in the Summertime, which wasn't like a big hit, but I remember that getting played a lot in that summer of 87. And Sold Me Down the River in the spring of 89 was a huge AOR hit. It didn't quite hit the top 40, though. They never had a top 40 hit in the States, but on the AOR stations, they were starting to they were starting to get some good airplay. And they're still a great live band. Mike Peters is the only original member, but they are still great live. A lot of passion. Passion is the best word to describe the Alarm. I mean, you can tell they really feel it. Their choruses are like, they're almost like soccer chant. Like you can hear these choruses were built to be played at stadiums, I think. Especially a song like Blaze of Glory. I think Blaze of Glory is a fantastic track. They still make they're still making albums pretty regularly. They're a little more polished. You know, they don't rock quite as hard, but they're good. I have a couple of them. But in the early 80s, when at the beginning years of MTV, the Alarm were right there, and they are killer. They got played a lot on college radio. But you listen to those songs today, and they still stand up. They just had a way for an anthem. The Alarm, fantastic.
Nice. I'm not familiar with the Alarm, so definitely I will explore that. And when you were describing about the soccer crowd chant, very similar to the band that I spoke at the start of the show, Boom Crash Opera, very big bombastic choruses and a lot of chants. Yeah, something I'll definitely explore that. Nice.
Thank you.
All right, guys. Well, I'll finish up with my final pick. I've actually swapped it around because I had this as an honorable mention, but I'm going to move it to an actual pick. This band had a moment in the sun with a particular song that charted. I think it hit number 20 in the US charts, got played in radio over here. Catchy as hell. They were very melodic. Their songs were kind of wacky. They had a real sense of humor, tongue in cheek. I think you'd classify them as hair metal, but sonically, there was a lot more depth to this band that a lot of people take credit for. And I'm talking about this band called Autograph and the album Sign In Please. Now, they had a monster hit with Turn Up the Radio, catchy as hell, and that was it, basically, for them. They supported Van Halen, and they were so good that Van Halen booted them off the tour. They had you had the lead singer, Steve Plunkett, great songwriter, vocalist. You had Steve Lynch, who's arguably one of the architects of finger tapping. He was right up there with Van Halen. And I'm not talking about early 80s. I'm talking about in the late 70s. He was kind of a veteran of the LA club metal scene. And he was one of the prototypes of the finger tapping. So when this band was actually supporting Van Halen on the 1984 tour, there was a rule: no finger tapping. And that's his bread and butter. So there were all these shenanigans that were inflicted on Autograph on that tour. They had like they reduced the space on the stage where they had to play. They actually had the house lights up when they were playing. All these things that just made it impossible for them to get any traction. Another reason why they didn't sort of kick on is they had a hopeless label. RCA is not a metal label. So their subsequent albums, what was they had...
That's the Stuff.
That's the Stuff. Didn't go anywhere. But to me, this band, I'll just put it up, reminded me of a heavy metal version of the Cars. Quirky, a lot of sense of humor. Like the lyrics, there's my girlfriend's boyfriend isn't me. Cloud Tim, In the Night, Frill of Love, 19 and Non-Stop. They're not dumb lyrics. It has an appearance of being kind of stupid, but there's actually very witty lyrics that are a level above what the average hair metal band that was playing at that time. They're still going around, albeit no original members left. Steve Plunkett is apparently a composer in Hollywood. He does a lot of jingles. He writes for a lot of theme songs for TV shows. So he's got a whole career. Steve Lynch teaches guitar, so he's faded away. And then you had Stephen Isham on keyboard, passed away. Kenny Richards on drums, passed away. And Randy Rand on bass also passed away. So they're defunct, the originals, but they're still going in a different incarnation. And I don't know if I'm really keen on that, because I think that the original chemistry of this band made it so special. So how would I describe them sonically? There's a lot of Van Halen, if you like that finger tapping and you like that sort of pyrotechnic firework type of Eddie Van Halen guitar work, it's there. But there's also a pop sensibility. You know, there's a lot of keyboards and quirky lyrics, hence my reference to the Cars. So I think this is one band that doesn't get recognized enough, and they're sort of regarded as a one-hit wonder because of Turn Up the Radio. And I mean, it's a monster hit. If you're going to be remembered for one song, it's so damn catchy. I would challenge anyone to listen to the first 10 seconds of that song and just keep on listening, because it hooks you in. Anyway, sign in, please, autograph. That's my pick.
I saw them open for Kix 3 times, and Kix would give them an hour. And this was just in the last 10 years or so. Randy Rand and Steve Lynch were still there the first time, and Steve Lynch was still a monster guitar player. And the second and third times, Randy Rand was the only original guy, and then he passed on. But they were killer live. I mean, to see an hour of autograph and then Kix comes out and kicks your ass. I mean, put on these great shows. Their singer, whose name escapes me, he does a fantastic job. And they put another album out maybe around 2010 too that was quite good as well. But Blondes in Black Cars, remember that song?
Catchy, funny, witty. It's tongue in cheek. It's just tongue in cheek. They're great songs. I think another thing is Steve Plunkett wasn't the most photogenic lead singer. He was no Bon Jovi. He's a little bit quirky looking, but hey, if they marketed it like Rick from the Cars, I mean, he was no oil painting, they could have gone down a whole different direction. But yeah, look, you think that you're supporting Van Halen on 1984 monster tour. You think that would have taken them to the stratosphere, but they were too damn good. And when you have rock bands at that level, jealousies and egos prevail. And David Lee Roth had a rule: never let a support band outshine the main. And they would deliberately pick bands that were terrible, so the crowds would throw apples or whatever, and that would pump them up for the main thing. But they made a mistake with this band because they were bloody good. So should have, could have, would have. Who knows? All right. John C., any honorable mentions that you want to throw into the show before we wrap this up?
You know, I'm going to say I didn't really think about an honorable mention, but I think in this case, the should have, would have, could have, Jason Becker.
Yes.
If ALS hadn't struck him down, my God, what he could have done.
Yep.
He was a great solo artist, but then joining David Lee Roth's band, I can only imagine where he would have taken his songwriting and playing if ALS hadn't gotten to him.
Absolutely.
Yeah, that's the one that was the other one that came to my mind. Because I mean, you can't you just can't wrap your head around Perpetual Burn, that solo album. That's just, I mean, maybe some people call it musical vomit because it's all this sweep picking, all these ridiculous notes, but there's a lot of melody and a lot of beauty to a lot of that playing. And man, we just got a taste of what he was able to do before he couldn't play anymore. So
yep, absolutely. Nice pick. John the Music Nut, any that come to mind?
You guys ever hear of Willie Nile?
No.
Mm-mm.
Willie Nile was the singer-songwriter. He's still out there from New York City. His debut album came out in 1980. It was very good. It got critical acclaim. He actually, I believe he opened for The Who, even when The Who were still playing the stadiums. He put out 2 albums that were, the second album didn't get as much critical acclaim. Neither album sold really well, but the people who bought them loved them. He had these issues with the record company preventing him from recording for 10 years. And then when he came back, he was still doing great stuff. David Letterman had him on his show, just like he had in the 80s, I believe. They were trying to give him a push, and then I think he ran into more record company problems, and that set him back again. And now, the last 15 years or so, he's doing this renaissance like David Crosby, in the fact that he wrote all these great albums late. He's probably put out about 8 albums in the last 15 years or so, and they're very good. How would I describe his sound? He's kind of like a Bruce Springsteen, but more rootsy and like with a dash of punk in it. He's excellent songwriter, but he only has like a cult following. He's pretty popular on the East Coast, but he only plays like 300-400 seat clubs. But great following. All of his stuff is really good, and it's a shame that he never really broke through. But I think it was the record label issues, and I think that stopped his momentum in his tracks. But definitely check out Willie Nile if you could. There's a collection of his first 3 albums on Amazon that you could pick up pretty reasonable. And my friend Jack, who passed away last year, he introduced me to Willie Nile's music, and he was spot on about Willie Nile. Fantastic. He's still great live.
Well, that's why I love doing these shows, because I get turned on to different music, and that's another one that I'll definitely investigate, John. No, I really appreciate that. I've never heard of him, but I will investigate. My honourable mention is a artist called Matthew Sweet. So Matthew,
Oside.
Yep. So that's the Girlfriend album, which is the Record Store Day version, which was the alternative. It's supposed to be a photo or a drawing of Tuesday Weld. This was his big album, had Girlfriend, Divine Intervention, I've Been Waiting, Winona. It's kind of a minor masterpiece. It came out in 1992, but charting-wise, it only popped into a number 100 in the US top 200. It's a real head-scratch. And you're thinking in 1992, that was where REM were at their zenith. You had a lot of alternative rock. This is power pop. There's jangle, there's dream pop. There's a whole lot of influences. There's you've got Richard Lloyd from television plays on it. You've got very Beatle-esque feel to it. In 1992, all the elements should have been there. Maybe he's not the most photogenic sort of performer. He kind of nerdish, but that's nothing to say why he shouldn't have been much more successful. He did a number of follow-up albums. I don't think this did any favors. Altered Beast, which is a good album, but it's much more of a difficult listen. It's not immediately as commercial and sugary as Girlfriend, but it does reward repeat listens. But he's got a vast discography, and it's a total head scratch why, and he was on a major record label, why he didn't break through and kind of have at least, semi REM numbers, because he's in that wheelhouse. So albeit he's a bit of a cult artist, he was in the college circuit. I saw him. He did tour Australia once. Apparently he's got this very big fear of flying, but they were able to con him over to Australia. I saw him and he was fantastic. And a lot of his songs got played on alternative radio. But alas, never break through into the commercial charts. Total head scratch. Matthew Sweet.
One of the best songwriters that came out in the 90s. Oh, no question.
Highest charting album, 100.
Yeah.
Why?
Sick of Myself from 100% Fun. That got played a lot here. And you thought that might have been the song that would have broken through. And it did get played a lot, but again, it just never went to that next level. It's a shame. What a heck of a songwriter.
Yeah.
Matthew Sweet.
So I can only pin it. Maybe it's image. Maybe he didn't have the right video clip. He didn't have the right image. Like even REM, they're not the most photogenic band, but they had great videos, and they had the Hollywood, power behind them to put this really interesting image in MTV. Maybe he didn't quite have that. I get the feel he's kind of a reclusive type of guy. He's very much an artist, and maybe he didn't really want to be at that level. But it is a total head scratch because, music should win out, and he's certainly got the songs pound for pound.
No question.
Thank you, guys. It's been a magnificent show. We have covered all genres. We've gone from thrash to americana. We've covered the whole gamut. It's been a wonderful show, and I've certainly picked up a few tips that I will be getting on www.amazon.com and ordering. I don't think my wife will be too happy about that, but anyway, we'll deal with that later. But always wonderful to be turned on to new music. So John Clauser, thank you for coming on the channel. My Music Corner, please check it out. And John the Music Nut on My Music Corner as well, and the Contrarians. And this little channel, please like and subscribe to Rock Daydream Nation. We're building a community here, and the more subs and the more likes means that we do more shows. Put your comments. Tell us what you think bands, artists that should have been much bigger. And one thing's guaranteed, you will see these gentlemen on a show real soon. Cheers.
Cheers.
Cheers.